All right, I've got 5 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. My name is Sean Eystone. Welcome, everyone. Currently, I am joined with fellow directors Etsy, Eastham, Godwin, and Williams. And I know Director Malone was going to be late, and Director Clausen should be here joining us shortly. Also on the call is Superintendent Matt Degner and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin. So I'd like to welcome everybody that's listening in tonight. So we can go ahead and move into our agenda. And the first thing up is our community comment portion. If you would like to make a comment to the board, you can use the raise hand feature and I will call on you. And Kim will give you the rights to speak and you will have 4 minutes to speak to the board. So at this time, are there any folks listening in that would like to make comments? All right, Kim, looks like Phil. Oh, and hand was up and then hand went down. Okay. Anybody else use the raise hand feature? All right, we will go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. For agenda approval, I would entertain a motion.
I move approval of the agenda for May 25th, 2021.
Second.
All right, Kim?
Online voting is open.
Oh my God, my shirt.
I'm a yay vote, Kim.
Thank you, Director
So
Clausen.
am I. So am
Thank
I.
you, Director Etsy. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you, Kim. We can move on to our consent agenda. I wanted to thank whoever got the little highlighted portions of the bills for ESSER funds, as I asked for that last time, and I appreciate that getting done. I did not have any questions as I looked at the bills. Did any other directors have any questions or comments as they reviewed the bills?
No, I reviewed the bills also, and I did not have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Lisa. Are there any items that directors would like to pull from consent? All right. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, so the next item is a public hearing on our certified budget amendment. And I have asked Director Clausen to step in for Director Malone, so I will throw it over to JP to read the hearing.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the district's proposed FY 2021 certified budget amendment. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on May 6th, 2021. Are there any comments from the board? Is there anyone from the community that would like to advise or provide comments to the board on the proposed FY 2021 budget amendment? If so, use the raise hand feature.
It appears there isn't, so we will call this public hearing closed. Thank you, Director Clausen. And we can move on to our discussions and our return to learn update. I will pass it off to Superintendent Degner.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, we have 3 different items listed under return to learn update. Most notably, probably the first one around health and safety, mask and quarantine protocol update. As we all track the news last week, we know that Iowa Department of Public Health released some guidance prior stating that their recommendation was that mask use should be optional and that parents should be allowed some choice around quarantine of students. And then following that, we had legislative action and the governor signing a bill that stated that schools could no longer mandate mask usage. And so you saw our communications following that last week. We still do have quarantine protocols in place in the district. We're continuing to use that health and safety mitigation effort, aligning those practices with back with Johnson County and the CDC around some of that. And so I just wanted to take a minute and make sure we said that out loud and give you guys a chance to ask or for us to answer any questions that you might have on that first piece. But that's the relatively quick update without me belaboring it further, as I've communicated a lot out in the last week or so regarding that. So any questions or things I could answer around that first one, or any team members?
I don't have any questions, Matt or Sean, but if I can, I just have to get some things off my chest on this particular item, if that's okay. And I think you all know by now that I rarely use the board table to make statements, especially when the die is cast and there's no more debate or discussion leading up to a vote. In this case, though, I just have to say something. I'm still incredibly angry from the law that was passed in the early morning of May 20th. And I feel like I just need to say a couple things. Last Thursday, as this all played out with the districts, all the districts, honestly, who were responding to this, you got the word out as quickly as you could. But of course, that was not in time for all parents to see. And I know, because I heard about it all day last Thursday, that there was disruption in classes. Students were confused, teased, maybe even worse. I know teachers were caught off guard. And so I'm getting all these inputs from, people calling, emailing, social media sites. And then I happened to go to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk later in the afternoon. And there we were, customers and employees all wearing masks because a store was allowed to continue to require masking. Businesses were given the time and the grace to plan, consult, and communicate about mask guidance, yet in our state schools, and the thousands of teachers, students, and families weren't even given the consideration of time to plan and communicate. Students, parents, and teachers went to bed Wednesday night with a set of expectations for what would occur in the classroom on Thursday. And in the middle of the night, literally in the middle of the night, unbeknownst to them, the rules changed. Parents weren't given the time to talk with their kids about what to expect. Teachers weren't given time to think through the ways to respond. And in the middle of all this confusion caused by adults, and I think making a political point, were our kids trying in a classroom to balance confusion, personal interests, family interests, social context. It's hard for adults in this context to make these kinds of choices. It's awkward. We're all getting used to changing guidance, but asking our kids to navigate that with no preparation, I think, is honestly unconscionable. They were the ones who felt the brunt of this change. I can tell you, as a leader of a large organization, I would never change the rules literally overnight for adults, much less for children, especially when those rules affected serious health and safety considerations for so many families. I'm disheartened by the law. I'm disheartened with the continued erosion of local control, especially in this case, with so little to gain, with so little time left in our school year. But what really, really makes me angry, because I could have managed this change in the mask mandate, what makes me angry is that we didn't give anyone time to plan and communicate and talk through this in a really sound way. I feel like that approach was honestly nothing but unconscionable and uncaring. And I'm also really angry because this has been probably the hardest year in our district, and we've been through a lot. And we've weathered a lot, but this year, time and time again, we've taken left balls, curve balls, changes, spikes, reductions. We've managed online learning, hybrid learning, all 100% in-person learning, and we've all done it together. And I just find it so hard to take that this last change came at us with such a little amount of time left in the year to pivot and respond. But I am going to say we did, and I'm going to thank our teaching staff, our administrators, our school staff, building principals, paras, every adult in our buildings. I want to thank you for how you've pivoted and tried to respond with care and empathy for students and families and parents who are struggling to work through this. It actually makes me incredibly proud to be part of our district because I know that we operate with care and compassion. And despite all the tragedy and hardships we've experienced through COVID, we have truly weathered the storm together with strength and grace and humanity. And I just wish that we could have ended this school year in a different way, but I am proud of the way in which our district pivoted. So Sean and Matt, thank you for giving me the opportunity to vent a little bit. I appreciate them.
Thanks, Janet, for your words. I don't know that I could have said it any better. Did any other directors have any questions or comments on this particular topic? Charlie?
This is Charlie. Janet, thank you so much for saying that. I agree with Sean. I wish I could have done as well as you did because you voiced everything I've ever had and every reaction I've had to this injustice by the state. Matt, I would ask if we know very much yet about the potential adverse things that are happening in classrooms. I think Janet's voiced a lot of support for our constructional staff, and I suspect they've done a marvelous work in managing this new rule. But I wonder, Matt, if there's anything you might think that we should be paying attention. We should pay some attention to now. And Brady, I might ask if you have some ideas too.
Sure, Charlie. So I think that, the things we should pay attention to, well, first, I just would want to back up and say thank you to our staff too, and to our principals and trying to follow that communication. We tried to put something out as quick as we could that morning. We're still unclear about, some of the transportation components about how the law and the executive branch orders from the federal government sync up. And so there's still a little bit of a lack of clarity in that aspect. But I think most of all, I just say thank you for our staff being flexible one more time with the set of circumstances they didn't ask for and didn't have time to plan for or prepare for. I think they did a commendable job in trying to watch out for any kind of bullying, harassing type behavior, either way, wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. Our building leaders did a great job that morning of trying to communicate to the whole school, to the students and to the teachers, and trying to reinforce care and compassion, for those folks as they make their decision. I think some of the implications, would be just some of that ongoing, right, about how that goes. And if as kids and parents are trying to work through this, and if they're asking their students to wear masks at school, do they feel comfortable still wearing the masks? If they're asking their students not to wear masks at school, are they feeling comfortable with that choice? And so trying to provide that support as we move through the last few weeks will be important as we go through there. And then I think the other thing we did mention, we're still doing quarantines, and we've seen a big decrease in those numbers. But I think if I'm being honest and transparent with you, one thing we'll have to watch for is that, if some students aren't wearing masks now, then that obviously changes the game on the amount of kids that could be in a quarantine situation, because as we know through those quarantines, it really relies on students being masked and protecting themselves from having to have a period of time away from school. So I would say those three things, just continuing to monitor the good treatment of each other and trying to treat each other with grace and compassion, the transportation issue that's kind of out there, and then how we work through the last few weeks here with students that may be asked to quarantine because of positive cases and non-mask use. Brady, if you have something else you want to jump in, you sure can. You don't feel obligated to go either.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I just, Janet, thank you very much, and other directors for your support and understanding and grace and compassion. And that's been not just on this, but throughout this year. It has been very challenging, and it was, as you expressed, it was frustrating late on a Wednesday night to know that things had dramatically changed, at least in how we were operating, and that would start effectively on Thursday morning. So I think some of the things that I would say that I know we've been doing, and I know that we'll need to continue to do in all of our buildings, are just circling back together as adults. That would be all staff, just to do check-ins, with each other, both, just sort of emotionally about how we're doing with it, but then also just to troubleshoot any hotspots that you might see, with students, if there's some that are struggling or more than others. I think that team approach at the building level, is always really, really important. And I think it'll be, I'd say critically important as we move through the last few days, because there's always a lot of emotions around ending a school year. Students, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different students. And I think that this adds another layer to those emotions. And I think it'll be important for us to have that happening in our schools and to have the clear communication, as I know Matt and his team have done very well, just to say that it's okay when we expect you to take some time to do that, that you have to let students know that you really care about them. Matt says this a lot, that's your first and foremost thing. And I think that'll be important as we move forward. Thanks for asking, Charlie.
So Matt, since you brought up the transportation part, what are our next steps there? I mean, I kind of catch little bits of different articles, and what I'm led to believe is that basically at the national level, at least the CDC, I don't know about the national government, have said that school buses count as transportation and there's a requirement for masks there. And what's happened at the state level, it sounds like they've left it up to like you to decide. I don't know exactly where we're at and how do we move forward. Maybe that's your confusion too, but
I'm just chuckling because I think you've stated the problem, as far as, and it's not funny at all, but at the same time, it's just the level of what we're dealing with. So yes, we have the law from the state, and then you have the guidance from CDC, and we look at the Transportation Security Administration, some of the things they put out about public transit and masks being required to be for use there. So we've worked with legal counsel. That's what we're continuing to try to do is try to get some clear guidance from legal counsel. The problem is I think they're unclear as well about what that direct guidance is. And so my message to our families around that stated what we know. And I've been in communication with Noreen and Cedar Rapids, and they've been on that basically the same path. And so us as a superintendent's group, we're trying to put our heads together. We're working through our lawyers to try to know what the right policy to follow is and the best guidance to give, but trying to have empathy for our bus drivers in the situation where they're tasked with transporting our kids and then having their backs to them as they supervise them, is that we didn't want a bus driver to get into an entanglement or any kind of a struggle with a student or family about the mask issue while they're trying to first ensure their physical safety to get home or get to school in an appropriate fashion. And so right now we'll strongly encourage people to wear the mask while they're on our buses. But at this point, having that straight out requirement, we haven't necessarily felt that we have clear guidance on that to know where to stand. So we'll continue to talk to Joe and the legal team about that. I know that the AEA is also consulting with Allers law firm in Des Moines through that. And so we're trying to get the best information we can as quick as we can on that end, Sean.
okay, thanks.
Yep.
So Sean, if I could ask a question of Matt. Matt, do you have any idea if a parent could do something legal wise to require that the bus that their child rides on has all students on the bus wearing masks, because that's the parent's interpretation of the federal regulations, and they think it's necessary to protect their child's health?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're suggesting there, Charlie, if they would explore legal options with us or with the state, with what the state legislation has been, or what necessarily angle you're looking at there. But I'm sure parents do have those questions and feel like there's some conflict there between the state law and the national guidance. And that's the same conflict, we're having with it. And I think that's why we just tried to be as transparent as we can until we can better understand what our direction is moving forward. The state law is written in the terms of property, that, while on property, so then a district bus is an extension of property. I think that's where it gets into the legality part of, okay, well, how far does that go? And then which law supersedes which? You could talk about the supremacy, obviously, of federal law to state law, but at the same time, the risks of violating state law in this climate as well are probably real for us to consider.
I have a question, Matt. We've had a number of email inquiries from parents today about the idea of using snow days or something to wrap up the semester or the trimester early. And I just didn't know if we've got a point of view on that, or if we thought through that. It feels like it's a very short amount of time that's under consideration. I just don't know if we've given it any thought, but I just wanted to raise it because we've had a number of emails today.
Sure. No, thanks for that question. You know, at the start of the school year, what we really talked about was delaying the start to our school year by 2 weeks and adding in these in-person, what we were hoping would be in-person instruction days here in June. And we knew that was a tough trade-off at the time, but knowing the way the COVID rates were at that point, I think everybody felt comfortable with that decision. That's why we approved the change and moved those days to now. There's been some local examples with Marion and Linmar doing that. Theirs was more specific to the derecho than COVID for why they had the extended school year. They had been already granted permission to excuse a number of days from their calendar from the state. And so their situation's not totally comparable to ours, and I know some people have referenced that in some of the communication that's come to me today. For us, I think that just even going through the process to make a calendar change kind of makes this a issue that I don't think we can probably address, because we would have to have another meeting to essentially set a following meeting where we would do a public hearing on the calendar and then make a potential change. So it's at least talking about 2 more meetings. Our next scheduled meeting isn't until June 8th. So if you wanted to explore that route to do something different with the days in reducing some of those school days, that would be the step we would have to take. We'd really need to do 2 subsequent meetings, one to set a public hearing and then one to actually hold the hearing and make a calendar change. For us, we do have days remember we certify our calendar based on hours, and we are certified over the appropriate number of hours, the 1080. So we are in addition to that, but that's typical for us in a usual school year. We usually don't exhaust all of our extra hours in there. Those are built in case we do have snow days. This year we were able to do virtual learning days, which help protect some of that. But I would just anchor us back to that beginning of the year conversation we had about moving those days and the reason for doing that.
Matt, on that, how many days over our required minutes are we?
We're roughly in that range of about 6 days, JP, where we have that many hours that equates to about 6 days.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, Matt alluded to it, when we talked about doing a 2-week delay, one of the guiding factors there was that we thought that gave us the best chance to have kids in a classroom to be learning for that entire time. And it turns out that it was right. I mean, we've got our kids in the classroom and numbers are looking fairly good. I think for the number of folks that have talked about the need to have the kids in class and the learning loss that has happened, I'm leery to jump on trying to cut short a school year at that point. There has been a few other points that have kind of come through some communications. One, I think it was even mentioned in the article where Linmar talked about ending their year early, is that it could become a big childcare issue if we were to all of a sudden end early when folks are not expecting it and summer camps and things like that are all set up. And it was also brought to my attention there may be some staff that's either hourly or paid daily, like substitutes or whatnot. And the more days we cut out of our school year, the less likely they are to earn a paycheck. So there's a lot to consider besides just saying we're going to end our school year early. But primarily, I'm leery to take any more days away from our kids being in a classroom learning. So that's where my head's at. If the board was willing to go down that route, Matt, you talked about how we need to set a public hearing and have a public hearing. And I know there's a certain number of days there between those 2 points. And is it even possible to work through that process before the end of the school year as it stands?
Yeah, and we did some legwork on that today and tried to check out. I don't think there's actual number of days we would have to adhere to do a calendar change. Of course, you know, the reason we do those things are for transparency with our community to give feedback. That was a process we worked through when we considered that previous calendar change for next school year. So I think it's trying to balance that with, you could put the meetings relatively close together and do a change. I think you articulated a concern, you know, that I would have, and I think that we need to consider is it is a change on families, right? That we have heard some families obviously advocate for the change, but there's other families that are probably planning on us going to school until June 11th. And so then you would just have to measure, if we're going to go down that road and consider something like that, how you get communication to them that a change is coming relatively quickly, that school would end potentially longer. And the thing I would just want to say to our staff and the kids that have asked for this, I mean, we get it, you know, we understand that it's been a really long and difficult year with a lot of transition, with a lot of change, with a huge ask of people's time, emotion, and energy for that. I think, like you said, there's other sides to the equation too that we have to consider along with all of those things.
Anything else on this one, directors, before we move on to the next piece? All right, go ahead, Matt, on to the next item there. It's like,
Sure. So
that's it.
our next item was 21-22 school year. And oddly enough, we had a webinar that day that was already previously planned with the Department of Ed to talk about ESSER funds. And so they spoke to us a lot about some of the work ahead for our summer on about the same day that big mass change happened. And so what I wanted to just talk to you guys about tonight is what has to happen really regarding our plan to expend our ESSER dollars. And so if you remember, when we've talked about roughly $41.5 million that have come to us through ESSER relief. And so that includes ESSER 1 at about the $1.6 million range. We've already encumbered those expenses and spent those dollars. That was early pandemic monies. ESSER 2 was $12.2 million. And then ESSER 3 has come to us in the wave of about $28.6 million. And those are just rough estimates. And so to spend those dollars, we're being asked to create a plan. We had to submit assurances to the state by Sunday. And so we've submitted those assurances. And then tonight to your agenda, I've attached the other guidance about what we'll need to do to create the plan that has to be submitted by August 23rd on how we plan to expend those dollars. The plan will open on July 1st. Some of this, the state is trying to get us information as quick as they can as they get it from the federal government. But obviously districts have been working through this process and spending some of these dollars and planning for the next year and encumbering those expenses as we go along. We can't wait until July 1st to start planning for that work. And so the substance or the big kind of 4 points that they included to us, of course, the one I've told you, we have to develop a plan for the use of the funds. The second point, we have to have some meaningful consultation with all required stakeholders and providing the public with an opportunity to provide comments. And so we'll need to think through how we collect some of that feedback. We've already done some things internally with staff about some of these ideas and how we've generated up some different ideas. The third part, I already talked to you about a little bit as well. We had to submit the assurances, and then kind of the secondary part of that is having the actual plan submitted by the August 23rd timeframe. And then once we have the plan, it needs to be publicly available on our website. They have also included that we'll need to review our return to learn plan every 6 months. They believe they've met the federal requirement around a safely returning students back to school plan by the return to learn plans they asked us to submit last summer, but they're asking for a continual review of those plans moving forward about how we adjust and pivot through the pandemic. And then as we revise it, then of course to continue to post that. And we've been very good about posting all of our return to learn work on the return to learn portion of our website. So I don't think any of those will cause questions for us. And so as we think about our overall ESSER plan, last week I shared to you kind of 7 big buckets that we've started to consider expenditures in these areas that will continue to bring back information, obviously, as the plan now opens on July 1st to the board around these 7 areas. And I'll just highlight them here again for you this evening. The first one is COVID mitigation and prevention. So you've heard us talk a lot about that through health and safety work this year. Technology, we've honestly spent a lot of time with technology as well. At-risk supports, continuity of service, so keeping some of our employees whole as we went through the pandemic and making sure that they continue to receive payment. Instruction under ESSA, learning loss, and then unspent balance support. And that unspent balance support really involves before, when we've talked about avoiding any kind of a budget cut this year because of a decline in enrollment, we're able to offset some of what we would have been in a deficit scenario for because of these ESSER funds. So as we consider those 7 big areas, that's our overall strategy for how we plan to address some of these. And then we'll need to continue to get that stakeholder input in those different areas from inside and outside the organization as we go through. So that was the overview I wanted to provide tonight about as we think about 21-22 school year and the expenditure of those ESSER dollars, and give you a chance to answer any questions or help us inform our work as we move forward.
Directors, Charlie, looks like you have some.
Yeah, so Matt, this is Charlie. I'm looking at the part of the state's document under district plan requirements, particularly, I guess, the 3rd and 4th bulleted points, which say that, you know, we have to say what kind of interventions we're going to have, why we're going to have them, and how we're going to monitor their effectiveness. And especially, we have to pay attention. We have to pay particular attention to the effect of the instruction this year on low-income students, students of color, English learners, kids with disabilities, students experience homelessness, and children in foster care and migratory students. So can we have some time here, Matt, as you have to work to put this plan together? Can we have some time as a board to look at those elements of your thinking and what you think how you think the next year will be different than it would have been if there was not a pandemic for those areas?
Yeah, I think certainly, Charlie, I think that's part of, you know, what we're tasked with doing is talking about how we plan to address those. And we've given you in some of those things in bits and pieces, just like as I've talked about, as we've had to scale some things up for next year, whether that's been our conversation around summer school and how we plan to expend some of the dollars for that, or whether that's looking at our class size model for next year and academic support teachers that we've added at both levels to address that, and trying to look through our RAM models, like I had mentioned with class size support. So I think some of those things we've kind of shared little bits and pieces around, but as I've talked about with those 7 large categories, I think, you know, that part, one particular topic might be the one that you want to have conversation on, but another board member might have another topic within another bucket that we also want to look at. So I think our job will be to give you that comprehensive review and make sure your example is great. I guess I hope you track what I'm saying there, but that's one example of probably what we need to do in all of the areas to make sure there's some depth of knowledge on how those funds are being administered throughout. So the piece for me now, knowing that we also have to have some continual engagement around that, which we should do and we've been doing, will just be, we don't want to make anything too black and white at this point before we continue with some of that engagement. And the state did also acknowledge that they know we've spent some of these funds. And so there's an element of, you know, get the input you can, or the input even on the things that you've decided to this point about what to do. So I think as we come back here in June, that's really where our work will turn with you guys, Charlie, as we think about the 21-20 school year. We won't be talking return to learn. We'll really be talking about our next school year and the expenditure of these ESSER dollars. One other point I should mention is that they did extend the authority for us to use these dollars to the 24 fiscal year, which helps tremendously, so that it's not a 2-year cliff per se. It's really more of a 3-year expenditure for us, which helps us a lot as we do long-term budget planning for this, which is, so that was great.
That was my one question, so you got it before I got to ask it. So
right.
Any other directors have questions on this? Right, it looks like we have another piece on the COVID data itself. Let's go ahead and move on to that.
Yeah, and the COVID data, this is just our check-in after the change of the original quarantine protocols that at that time, then we were trying to reflect what the Iowa Department of Public Health was recommending to us. And now we know that they've made quarantine optional. So we're back more following the CDC guidance. But as we look at Johnson County positivity rates, the county's down to 2.2%, which is an improvement from, again, where we were at 2 weeks ago when we last looked at this data. Our active student positive cases, percentage of total students is at 0.3%, and active staff all the way down to 0.09%. And those numbers are fairly comparable to where we were at in that 2-week time period, the last time we checked in with the board meeting. So I think we're sitting, I mean, obviously we want all those numbers zero, but we're sitting okay, and that change hasn't negatively impacted what we're seeing in rates. So I think that one's relatively quick unless we have any questions, but.
Open it up for questions. I don't look at our dashboard every day, but I do every few days just to kind of keep tabs on it, and it definitely looks a lot better than it did, right? There's a whole lot of bold numbers on there, and now there's occasionally something that hits the 10 that show up, but it's not a lot. So I appreciate all the efforts that are being done, both in our schools and in our community to help bring those numbers down.
And Sean, I did think of one other item if I could mention it to you.
Yeah, go for it.
We've had some other questions about other health and safety protocols. If we were changing those, we're not changing those before the end of the school year. So just because there was a change with masks and some of those things, we're not removing other health and safety protocols from our buildings or from our district guidance at this point. And so we're adhering to those as we move throughout the year. There's been some conversation on graduation. We don't have a different plan to increase that from the 4 tickets that we've distributed at this point. And so I think we would want to have that feedback from the board if there was any expectation we do something different there. But our plan is to continue those events as we had planned. Just because we received a quick change last week didn't necessarily change our thinking about the best way to approach the end of the school year or those events this summer. Or excuse me, this spring.
Any comments on that? I guess I would ask what the regulations might be on masks at a graduation. I know that would probably dictate whether or not I'd be willing to increase numbers or not. I know when you and I had spoke, Matt, it sounded like even going from 4 to 6, you're talking about like maybe a 2/3 kind of capacity at the arena, and 8 would be pretty full. And those two things kind of scare me, particularly if we're not allowed to have folks or not allowed to mandate masks. That'd be pretty crowded for my taste. And
I don't think we would be able to mandate masks, and nor do I think the arena is planning to or willing to at this point. And so if we were going to increase it to 6 and masks are optional in that sense, it really becomes a general admission type experience. If you were going to increase those tickets to 6 or 8, 6 would put us at almost a 2/3 capacity event. And if people aren't all wearing masks, that's what informed our thinking about staying put with where we're at with the 4 tickets that we had planned on administering. We could have young students there that of course still haven't received the vaccine and some of that. And so really I didn't change any of our thinking about how to approach that event. I know that's still going to frustrate some folks that we're maybe hopeful that event would be a little bit larger at this point, but I think our best path forward is the one we had planned on.
Are we doing any type of recording, live streaming? What are options there?
Yeah, I'll have Nick talk a little bit about what the options are for that actual day, and then also the alternative that's been offered to folks that didn't feel comfortable with that experience.
Yeah, thank you, Athena. We're going to have a few different things offered there. We will have the live stream. We're working on what's the best channel for that exists on right now. We were talking about having that on the district YouTube channel, so that way it's easy to find, but we'll make sure that that's readily available. That's also going to be recorded and produced like our graduations have been in the past. We're working with our same group of individuals, so it should be a high quality recording for people who'd like to watch it after the fact. So those are a couple pieces there. And then, our principals have done a really nice job, I would say, of being sensitive to some of our families who are in a situation where maybe they have someone who is, medically fragile, and they've set up some alternative possible graduation experiences for those individuals, whether it's just getting your diploma in the building, shaking hands, doing things. But I feel like we've got some good options, which also makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about maintaining the 4 tickets as Matt discussed.
Thank you.
Anything else from directors? All right, thanks, Matt and team. Let's go ahead and move on to our next discussion item, which is our equity update. I don't know if Matt's going to start, and I think Brady might be talking here in a little bit.
Yeah, I'll just start with a update around the ombudsperson role. We had hired Taj Suleiman from Dubuque to come do that for us, and then Taj has since left for another opportunity. So we've had that position again posted and now closed, and we're reviewing potential candidates, and we'll be getting interviews scheduled here shortly to hopefully fill that position here once again soon. The other part we might take off from the top that I'll ask Chase to talk about here is with the administrator leadership standard that we talked through with you a little bit last time, and the work around the teacher standard and how we plan to kind of time that out as we move forward.
Good evening. Sorry, I'm having, thanks, Matt, for making me talk. I'm having some voice problems.
Yeah, I tried to avoid it for a long time here, but got you now.
This might not work out well. There's really not a lot of an update from last month. Brady and I continue to work on it. It's been put on hold because of negotiations a little bit as we get more guidance from the state on the administrative guideline. But we haven't put a formal timeline together, but really our recommendation as we work with the committee is that we would focus on this administrative piece first to get an understanding, to get our administrators an understanding of what their responsibilities are under the new guideline, as well as trained up on that guideline before we move to the teacher piece. And so we see this as a multi-season process, something that while we had started down the path of teachers with where the state is going and how they're prioritizing it, we believe we need to shift gears and focus on the admin piece first and then follow up with the teacher piece. While that's very froggy in my response, Brady, anything to add on that?
No, Chase, I thought you were getting emotional about the upcoming social studies review report. So I'm sad to hear that's not what it is. No, I think I think they'll be running parallel to each other. I think just you described the shift a little bit on which one happens slightly before the other is well stated.
So that's our update on 2 of the 5. I don't know if there's any specific questions about either of those 2 before we transition over to Amy and her team about the other 3 that we've provided updates on.
So Matt, just for clarity in my mind, so you will be getting to teachers 3 months from now or 6 months, or do you have a calendar period here that we can expect?
Well, so Charlie, the way that our negotiated agreement's set up is it's kind of an all or nothing situation for this year. And as we do this work and we begin the year, we don't believe we have time to get the teacher standard updated and in place and admin trained before we need to let teachers know what the evaluation model is. And so really we see this as a year to evaluate where we are with the administrators, to provide that training, to finalize the standards for the teacher piece so that we can implement it into the teacher evaluation for the 22-23 school year.
Okay, and the reason for this is because of the way the state's handling their regulations on standards for administrators. I understand that correctly.
Twofold, Charlie. So yeah, one is you have that the state's released now a standard for our leaders, which makes a lot of sense and is in line with the work that we've done around wanting to create a standard. And then I think the other one, just to be honest with you, is as we've talked to groups of teachers about this, we felt like it was necessary to make sure our evaluators are trained in what they're looking for in the classroom before our teachers are subject to that. And so I think that our responsibility as we kind of work through this in a tiered approach in our organization is to make sure that the leaders first know what their expectation and what the standard is, and that they've provided training and support to be held accountable to high expectations around that standard. And then the next step is we do that for the teaching staff. And that was what we heard from different teacher groups too, is that made sense and made them feel more comfortable about how they would be evaluated in those areas. And that's not just from our teacher group as a whole. I would say that also comes from some of our teachers of color that have communicated that that's an effective way to look at this approach. Before, we would just expect our teachers to be able to meet that standard and high expectations, or that our administrators could look at that standard and say that with confidence.
Okay, so this may be actually a stronger way of moving towards a standard we're looking for.
That's yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, I'll switch it over to Amy and she'll talk you through the other three components.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, everyone. So we have 3 items again to share with you tonight: the PBIS and Rethinking School Discipline work group update, social studies curriculum review update. Brady's going to take that. And then and Laura Gray will talk about our final professional development that we had as part of that mandatory equity PD this year. I'll take the first one, the PBIS and Rethinking School Discipline. Last night we held our 11th meeting of the year. If you remember, we had we had intentions to pull the group together 10 times, but after we got to the 10th meeting, or approaching the 10th meeting, we did share with the group that we did have a desire to pull them back together from time to time to, update them on our progress since the previous meeting, and ask for any feedback there. And so we held that 11th meeting last night, and we were able to report out on about 2 months of work that had happened since that and last meeting at the end of March. So we covered 3 major areas: one around restorative practice, restorative justice, the work that had gone on there, as well as an update about the care assessment process that's new to the district this year, and then an update around social emotional behavioral health. So I'll just take a few things, or share a few things. As far as restorative practices and restorative justice, Laura Gray has pulled together a team of what we're calling our district RJ team that's comprised of staff members in the district as well as some stakeholders outside the district. And this group has had a particular interest over the last several years around restorative practice and restorative justice. And they've done and offered a lot of trainings for our staff. And again, we have not had a standardized approach to implementation of RJ in the district. So that group has really just provided that training, after hours on Saturdays. They have done some circles in the buildings, and as they've trained other staff members, we definitely have, some restorative practices happening already. So that group has been pulled together just to help share ideas or brainstorm, what we could be looking at or doing as far as implementation over about a 3-year period. In addition to that, then Laura Gray and Shrita Martin have held 1 of 2 days worth of training already for the teaching and learning directors. Last week on Thursday was the first day, and then this coming Thursday we'll have our second day of training with that. We've enjoyed that so far. And then Laura and I have spoke with Nancy Reistenberg from the Minnesota Department of Education regarding what district-wide rollout could look like. And then Nancy has offered us a couple of different people to reach out to as far as potential people that would be willing to consult with us on that work. So we're excited about that. And then as far as the care assessment process, Kate Callahan, Dustin Gehrig, and Talia Meidlinger from UAY talked about the care assessment process that we've rolled out in our secondary buildings this year and what our approach to that is. And that care assessment is really around, threats that are being made. And we've talked to you from time to time about that, but we shared that presentation last night with the work group as well. And then finally, our last update was around social emotional behavioral health, and Laura Daly and her learning supports department team, Allison Freitag, Christy Miller, Corrine Frank, have all been really supportive of helping to move that work forward. And some of their work, not all of their work, but some of their work is centered around working closely with the AEA and trying to bring more consistency with practices across the district. So the way PBIS had trained in the past was buildings would set their own examples of what constituted a certain behavior, for example, or buildings would set their own in and out criteria for students who may be in need of an intervention. And so we're bringing together documents from across the district and trying to come up with consistent practices and that way. So that's one piece of the work. Another piece that they're doing is, you know, that this year we've rolled out a social emotional learning screener for students in grades 2 through 8. So one of our next steps was to think about doing that for our 9th through 12th graders as well. And so they've been investigating a system through Panorama. So lots of good things happening with that. And we'll continue to pull that work group together again. And we plan to do that late in the fall. And I would throw it over to Laura next to provide a quick update on development, and then we'll go to Brady.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to keep my video off because my internet is unstable, so bear with me here. I did the last mandatory equity PD with Laura Daly, and those have been really awesome to just get something in front of the staff. It's not ideal that we weren't able to interact how we would normally interact in professional development, but at least, we were having a collaborative effort and at a district-wide level. So this last one, we really focused on just wrapping up all of the work that we've done thus far, where we started with cultural proficiency and then some accountability measures, and then into the beginnings of culturally responsive teaching in regards to trust and building more trust with students. And we really talked about social emotional learning. And Laura Daly shared an assessment for adults to kind of help self-regulate. And something that Nancy talked about that Amy and I said was really, really rich was this thought that, as the educators, as the classroom educators and the administrators in the building, all the adults, all the stakeholders need to know how to self-regulate as adults. And so I know that that's a shift in our in a lot of cultures, because usually you're like, you go to work and you just do the job. But there's something really rich about understanding how when we're triggered as adults, we can and learn how to self-regulate. We can model that for the students. So when we see behaviors that might be egregious or that might be a reaction to some, hurt or pain or trauma, we'll know how to, better empathize and manage that with the students. And so that was really our last professional development. But looking forward to more, and we have plans to do it in a more interactive way next year. So I'm really excited about that. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura. Brady?
All right. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Laura. Directors, I've done several talks about this process, and each of them seems to run a little bit long. And I realize, well, I'm a social studies teacher and I like to talk, and this is social studies. So I will try to be mindful of that. But I appreciate the chance to talk about the social studies review process again and to give you an update. Obviously, attached to the board docs was the self-study team's report that was produced. And I just want to start with some thank yous. Laura was fantastic as a part of our team, as she always is. And then also in working with some of the cultural, there's a subcommittee of the culturally proficient teachers that did some work with us in curriculum. Nick was involved, of course, as a leader in the secondary world. Scott was there before him. And Ruthina, Director Malone, I'd like to just give a shout out. Her participation as a board director was fantastic. And then also Diane, a lot of the work that we did this year ended up focusing on elementary. We felt that we had some really good opportunities to make some immediate and important and necessary changes. And Diane was just a fantastic partner throughout that process. So I want to give a public recognition to all those folks, and Diane on the elementary side especially. Michelle Croft also, I should say, helped us with the data analysis and the construction of the questions, which was fantastic. So the curriculum review process in the district is typically an 8-year process. And toward the end of that or the beginning of it, however you would want to look at it, there's the formation of a self-study team that has 3 tasks, basically. It is to affirm or revise your mission statement for your discipline. It's to evaluate data around your discipline and your program. And then from that data analysis, determine strengths and limitations that transform into a recommended plan of action. And so the self-study report that you have is the compilation document effectively. We had 41 people on our team, which was a phenomenal number. We met for 3 times over Zoom for a couple of hours and then did some, work obviously around that. I will say to the board, if you wonder if your diversity, equity, and inclusion comprehensive plan comes into play in these processes, I will tell you without question that it does. Much of our work and how we wrote our questions for the survey, making sure that they were accessible to as many of our families as possible, how we selected community members to be on the team, the process that we used, the criteria that we considered, what we talked about in terms of having a curriculum that supports culturally responsive teaching and that is more inclusive and equitable. All of those things are found in your diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And that framework allowed us to have sort of an anchor for the work that we were doing. So I just want you as a board just to know, that's how that manifests itself in the work that we're doing. And in fact, there are some specific things in that document that specifically talk about the review process, the curriculum review process that we were very mindful about. So the 41 members included community members. We have 2 wonderful University of Iowa social studies education professors that are newish to our community that were involved. We had teachers across the K-12 spectrum who were social studies teachers. We had an ELL teacher, a teacher librarian, a special education teacher. We had 3 current students. We had fantastic community members and administrators and staff. So it's really a strong team. There's been a lot of conversation about social studies education, as we all know. And I think the team did a great job of thinking not only about what we teach, which can generate a lot of public discussion and sometimes controversy. If we think about, is this person mentioned or is that book taught, why or why not? We talked about what we teach, but importantly, we talked about how we teach it. And we came together as a team and really landed on our state standards and our national standards, which are focused on an inquiry model, or sometimes they're called an inquiry arc, as the way to best balance, what we teach, making sure that it is more culturally responsive and inclusive and representative of our wonderfully diverse community, but then also how we teach it in a more culturally responsive manner so that all students feel welcome in our classrooms and feel like they belong in our classrooms and they see themselves and they're able to engage in high levels of learning and a rigorous experience. So much of the work that you'll see in the document focuses on, that inquiry model. It is connected directly to our state standards in the state of Iowa. The Iowa Corps for Social Studies they have inquiry anchor standards, just like what's called the C3 framework, which is college, career, and civic life, which really guide our national standards in the social studies education field as well. So we're excited about it. I think students are going to have classrooms that are really engaging. I think that they're going to find it to be an interesting process because the inquiry arc really looks at compelling questions, ones that aren't easily answered. The ones that I fell in love with when I was a student and that helped me become a social studies teacher. And then what we do is we facilitate that process of a sustained inquiry through that, helping students to develop supporting questions. That ability to generate questions to help answer questions, I think is really critical to our success in the classrooms and beyond. And that's what this model focuses on. And then applying disciplinary standards and content. So there is a role for rigorous examination of content, of course, and that connects with our state standards. And I think the expectations of our community and our classrooms. We think about how would a historian approach this question? How would an economist approach this question? What about a geographer? All of those different ways of thinking about a particular problem or question is really exciting for students to go through, evaluating sources of information. And here's where the what can come into play. A good inquiry model, or the inquiry arc, has a rich repository of primary and secondary resources that have been curated by the teacher and supplemented by the students, that provide them with the opportunity to really evaluate evidence and sources of information from across a variety of perspectives. And that's where you have a really rich and interesting and nuanced social studies classroom, is when that's happening. And I think that's sometimes where there's some misconceptions, publicly, on both sides about how our classrooms would work if they're working in their ideal sense. Of course, we're going to be looking at things from across political spectrums and from different perspectives. And we're going to help students learn how to evaluate those sources of information, how to use that as evidence to construct their own arguments, how to communicate their arguments, and to critique others in a compassionate, empathetic way. And then from that, really learn how to take informed action to become, better members of our civic life. And so that's the inquiry arc that we're moving toward, that you'll see in the document. At the elementary level, to go through some of the more specific changes that you would see, one of the important things that came from our work was the recognition that we need someone dedicated at the K-6 level with better kindergarten through sixth grade expertise than I have to help do social studies curriculum coordinating. So I'm really excited that we're able to carve out a release time position for a curriculum coordinator who will have social studies K-6 underneath their umbrella. I think that's a fantastic change that came from this model. I think it's a big value add for the system. We are piloting a set of curricular materials from a company called Inquire Ed, which is a startup company that's been around for 4 or 5 years, started incidentally by a teacher who taught at Willowwind here in our community. And they have a set of curricular materials called Inquiry Journeys. That's a K-6 inquiry-based set of materials. They're adaptable, they're digital, they are more culturally responsive and inclusive than we're seeing in anything else that we're looking at. The pilot includes 30 teachers. They've received 2 training sessions with the Inquire Ed trainers. We have inquiry leads that they are called at every grade level. They've received 2 one-hour coaching sessions with the Inquire Ed trainers. We worked with Denver Public Schools. I think I reported out previously. Dubuque is adopting this curriculum, set of curriculum materials as well. So I'm in contact with their social studies coordinator. And the pilot's going really well. The response that we've received from the teachers is that students are really engaged. They want to do more social studies, which for me is music to my ears, of course. And they're teacher-friendly materials. We appreciate, I think Diane would second, that Inquire Ed is willing to make changes. We have meetings with them and say, there's some things that we've been considering or feedback we've got. We have every assurance, and Denver Public Schools assures us as well, that Inquire Ed as a company is responsive to our needs. And so we're excited about the direction of that pilot, and we're hopeful that that continues to go well, and that we'd be looking at adopting those curriculum materials for the start of next school year. So that'll be an immediate change, not only in how we're teaching in our elementary classrooms, but what we're teaching. The materials we've been using, we're not using anymore. And I think we're excited to see what those would look like. This summer, we'll line up our priority standards for social studies in the elementary school for their progress reports on the report cards, with the new, at least with the inquiry arc, and probably with this, with the materials from Inquiry Journeys or Inquire Ed. And we'll also look at the time allocation. One of the challenges, of course, that we always find in our elementary day is that our wonderful elementary teachers, and they are amazing. I'm like in awe of them all of the time. They teach everything. So they're going to be looking for, we'll help them find ways to connect this social studies curriculum and the materials and the lessons to our reading standards. We see a direct connection to the next generation science standards, which are an inquiry-based model. And so we think that we can find ways to connect our curriculum even more closely and be aligned with our standards and have a sort of a consistent approach to teaching and learning. At the secondary level, we are going to revise our existing curricular units in partnership with the University of Iowa. to make sure that they are more supportive of culturally responsive teaching. That was a request of the teachers. It's a necessary change, and it's one that I think we'll be able to do in partnership with University of Iowa, and I think it's going to produce really good. I think it's going to produce really good results by building off of the work that we've done previously, and then making it stronger. We're also looking at doing an audit. This is something in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Plan, an audit of what I would call our supplemental materials, not our core materials that we purchase for use or adopt for use, but our supplemental materials, just to make sure that they're grade level appropriate, and also that they are representative of the diversity that we have in our community, and that they are also representative of a good inquiry model, which would have a rich repository of resources and sources of information. The PD focus that is being recommended by the plan is focus area number 1, and this was a request by the teachers and the staff, was to have professional development to support culturally responsive teaching in social studies classrooms specifically. And this is building off the wonderful work Laura's been able to do, and Laura Daly and others this school year, but making it more targeted toward the social studies classrooms. And then professional development focus number 2 will be differentiated instruction, something we've done in the district several years ago. But some of the feedback that we got was that sometimes teachers struggle to meet the diverse learning needs of the students in their classroom, the students who are struggling, and then the students who have accomplished what we wanted them to do. They've demonstrated mastery and now need extensions. And that's where differentiated instruction really comes into play. So that'll be our second area of professional development. I think another immediate change that you'll see is the creation or the formation of a student-based leadership or advisory team, specifically designed to have them to help us throughout these 8 years and beyond on social studies curriculum. I met with some phenomenal students who were very interested in our work and very interested in the board, committed to the board's priorities and to great social studies education. And they would love to be on a leadership advisory team. I think this would be my recommendation. I think every curricular area should have that. I mean, we wait sometimes too long. We have an 8-year look-in where we involve students more formally. So we're excited to get that rolling. And then I think the other thing that came out of our team was the need to have this be the framework that you use for annual evaluations of progress of your department. And so we're looking to do that a little bit more formally maybe than we did between the last 2 curriculum review cycles. So it isn't just a report that you have in front of you that we talk about and then gets put on the shelf a little bit after 4 or 5 years. So I was trained at the University of Iowa in graduate school in the early 90s on the inquiry model by wonderful Professor Bruce Fain, who's still around our community. And it's great social studies. And I think it is a wonderful way to balance out some of the seemingly competing interests that we have out there in the community, which I don't necessarily think are actually that competing. I think what we all want is students to being great, engaged in critical thinking and, learning how to see multiple perspectives and understand that history is rich and nuanced and complicated. And that's really, I think, the direction that we're going in, and I'm excited about the work. So that's the self-study report. I don't think Diane or Laura, if I missed anything. Oh, we are going to look at scope and sequence too of 7 through 12. K through 8 is sort of locked in by the state. They tell you these are the courses you're teaching and these are your standards. 9 through 12, you have a little bit more flexibility. There's some state requirements, of course, around graduation with American history and American government, and now financial literacy, which we have to use econ for in part. But we'll take a look at scope and sequence 7 through 12, looking specifically maybe at 9 through 12 to see if there aren't some opportunities to build out some elective courses that we think would be really exciting and engaging for students and staff in the community. And I'm happy to answer or take any questions, obviously, too.
See, this is why schools have bells that go off to stop social studies teachers from going on forever.
I've worked for years to get rid of the bells and just, and I'm done, then yeah.
I really appreciate that report, Brady, and I was glad I had a chance to talk with you about some of the details earlier than this too. So directors, any questions on Brady's part, or I don't know if Diane wanted to weigh in on anything?
No, just to say that, Brady did a fabulous job at facilitating this group and then pulling everything together in this report and then sharing it out with folks too. So really, really do appreciate that. And I'm also very excited about the changes that are coming forth, especially at the elementary level.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I will comment. I loved reading the report. I really appreciate everybody's work on this. I think it's validating as a board member when we, put together a policy like the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan to see how that actually plays out for students. And I was just very, very pleased with the depth and the breadth of the work on social studies, that we weren't just picking a different textbook or just, getting rid of some chapters for a textbook, but that we're really examining the way our kids engage with that material to help them be better civic participants in our civic society. So thank you all for the work. It's very validating and encouraging. And I hope that other curricular areas will follow this model. Because I think it looks very powerful.
Brady, I'd like to express my gratitude to you also for taking the time to meet with me and going over how the process was going and what your intents were. And I second what everyone said about having the DEI plan as part of your standards that are underwriting what our social studies will be trying to accomplish over the next very few years. I hate to muddy or to spoil your wonderful report, but I do have to ask, do you have any idea yet of whether or not the legislature's attempts to do something weird about how we understand enslavement in this country, if that's going to affect anything that's a part of the review's overall plan for the social studies over the next few years, or is it too early to tell yet?
Thanks, Charlie, for that question. It might, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. It might be too early to tell, but if I take the words of the legislators at their face value, during the legislative debate on the House of the floor, there were assurances that the investigation into topics such as, the institution of slavery or enslaved persons or oppression or racism was fine, was okay and allowable, and in fact necessary as a part of an investigation into larger questions and to develop a better understanding of our history, provided that students are exposed to, again, I'd say like a rich array and vast array of resources. I'll take the legislators who would propose that and floor manage it at their word. And I do think that we're going to be okay. I think that's where, to me, the inquiry model, you're asking students compelling questions that don't have an easy answer, and probably, in fact, have several answers. And we're asking them to evaluate sources and use evidence in the creation of their own arguments. So I actually think I think this allows us to do that, to stay true to the values and the priorities of the district, while also engaging in powerful social studies and meeting some of the, I guess, questions that the state legislators might have.
I appreciate your optimism there. So
I'm an optimist. Thanks.
So Sean, just maybe one thing as a wrap up on the equity items, and I don't mean to cut off questions if other people have them around that, but I would just say I'm really proud of the work we did in this area this year about continuing to have the monthly updates and committing to those 5 action steps. Some of them aren't fully complete, but as Brady went through that social studies report and Amy went through the discipline protocols and procedures in the PBIS and Rethinking Discipline group, and Laura talked about her monthly PDs, there's been a significant investment in this work throughout the year alongside COVID. And I think that's a success for us as a district. Do we have a long ways to go in terms of our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts? Of course we do. But we've also committed a tremendous amount of resources, time, energy, and effort to starting to address that problem this year. And so as we think about the goals that we set over the summer, I think it would be a healthy thing for us to continue trying to narrow down some very definite action steps that we would want to take next year and continue to try to provide those updates as we go throughout the year too. I think that's been a good format for us. It's kept the work moving and it's helped us reach these goals as we approach the end of the school year here.
Thanks, Matt. Were there any other questions from directors before we move on? All right. Thanks again, everyone. Let's go ahead and move on. We do have one action item, a follow-up to our public hearing earlier. So we have our certified budget amendment. Do we need any, we got some context for this last time, I believe, but is there any context we need tonight, Matt or Les?
I would just share with the board that this is a regular process we do every year to amend the budget prior to May 31st. As a gentle reminder, this sets the 4 functional categories at which the auditors will test our expenditures when they do the audit. And from a state compliance perspective. And so it really becomes a compliance issue to make sure our expenditures are within those levels. And when you set the certified budget in April of 2020, you had no idea of what 2021 was going to bring and what kind of ESSER funds would be flowing into the district, et cetera. And so this provides just a more timely perspective on our current year budget. It does not impact taxes or any of the levies that are in place either for the current year or for next year.
Thanks, Les. Any questions, directors, on that? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the FY 2021 certified budget amendment.
Second.
All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thanks, Kim. Next up, we have our agenda setting for the next regular board meeting. It is on the 8th and it has all of the usual suspects on there. I don't believe we are going to have a student representative update at that point, so we'll probably remove that. But we do have an operations committee update on there, and then our portrait of graduate update, which is, I think the last meeting is this week. So we'll have some kind of final notes from that. And then we do have our work session scheduled after that to talk through our guiding principles for FMP 2.0. And so I would throw it out to directors for ideas to add things to that. One thing that I've kind of mentioned before, and I'll bring it up again for a future meeting, is we talked about at some point, having a special education update and looking at data, specifically looking at seclusion and restraint data, but discipline data and any other special education update I think would be good. And then we did get recommendations of things to add in the realm of special education to our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. So I think that's worth a discussion. I don't know if that whole topic belongs as its own standalone type work session or just a discussion item at one of our board meetings. I could kind of see it going either way.
Can we start with an agenda item at the next board meeting, and then depending on how that goes, decide if, next steps for a standalone work session?
I think we could. I don't know if we'd be ready to have data available to us to discuss, or just kind of work through some of those recommendations. If we had both, that'd be great to talk about it all in one shot. But I think in order to get it moving, if we could at least talk about something at the next meeting, I would appreciate it.
Sean, I support our undertaking a discussion at the next meeting too. I kind of think Ruthina might have a pretty good idea there. Put it on as a discussion item if we need more time at a work session to continue it that way too. So, and I'm not quite so sure if if the equity committee is looking for us to produce data at this time, or to produce a method for getting more data.
I just know that, when we had it was several meetings back now, one of the things we talked about is making sure we were kind of owning it, right? All of us owning it and kind of staying on top of it. So I'm trying to do that very thing myself and hold myself accountable to making sure we're looking at it. So other topics to add on either next meeting or beyond, either from directors or the admin team? All right. I know we do have coming up in the meetings, and actually I think, yeah, we have our policy review will be there as well. That'll be sort of our discussion, and then the second meeting in June, hopefully we can vote to adopt. So before we adjourn, just remind directors and others that we do have a closed session and then an exempt session, and you should have links to both of those meetings. The closed session is first. I would give us about 5 minutes of a break before we start that closed session.
That would be great if you do it.
All right. All right, so before we adjourn this one, anything else we need to bring up real quick? All right, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thanks everyone.
Folks.